in gardening. And so today we are going to start our gardening series with Elizabeth Driscoll, and she is over at NC State with our 4-H, and some of you may already know her and may have seen her from previous learning bursts that we've had on our initiative or during our initiative. So I just want to turn everything over to Elizabeth or Liz, and you guys have some fun today.
Yay. All right. Thank you so much, Sharonda. Thank you, Emma. You all are some of my favorite groups because you're working with just the cutest little gardeners. You know, I love smiling little faces, little hands in the soil. And so I'm excited to dig in with you guys today. We are actually going to start with the basics. We are going to dig into soil. And I thought that's where if we understand our soil and can appreciate our soil, then we can grow some really great gardens. So like Sharonda said, I'm at NC State. I'm with Cooperative Extension. I have a 4-H appointment across crop and soil science. That's who I'm repping today, and horticulture and entomology and plant pathology. So I am all things young people, soil, plants, and bugs and diseases. And so I love it all. I'm just a big nerd, and I'm looking forward to nerding out with you this afternoon. So give me a minute. I'm going to share my screen. Find here we go. Share. All right. Can y'all see that okay? Okay. So I've got let me find my chat box too real quick before we get started, just so I'm organized. I'm gonna put that over here. So my understanding is that all of y'all have some gardens. Some of you might be getting started with gardening. Some of you might have a little more experience gardening. But no matter sort of how long you've been doing it, I feel like soil is kind of the secret to being a good gardener. And so I don't know how often we take the time to appreciate our soil, but this is what we're going to do today is we're going to get growing and get started with soils. So our plan, I lost my cursor. Our plan is we are going to do, I'm going to give you a little bit of information, lots of room for questions and conversation. So as you guys have some ideas, make sure you put it in the chat box or unmute and ask your question. And we're also going to do some activities that I think you will have fun with your kids. So a little bit of both, a little bit about discovering soil, but discovering soil through a few hands-on activities. So if you, we'll pause maybe in just a minute. And if you guys want to run and go grab a cup of soil, I should have told you ahead of time, you can. Otherwise, I've got my trusty soil cam. We can dig into the soil that I brought into our webinar today. Okay, so I like to call it soil sleuthing. Did you know that across North Carolina, there are soils of every kind? So from the coast, we've got, a pile of sand to stretching across to the Piedmont, heaps of clay. Up in the mountains, we have everything from what I like to call fairy dust soil, but it's really high in mica content, to rocks just at the surface. So no matter where you are gardening, your soil varies dramatically in its diversity, which we'll talk more about what that means. The physical properties, biological properties, chemical properties, all of these different components help us understand a little bit about our soil. So one of my favorite things to do is to just go out and see what you have. Go dig a hole, right? Everyone can dig a hole. Maybe not today because it's so blessed hot and it hasn't rained, so the ground is pretty hard, but everyone can go dig a hole, right? So what I think, this is sort of my my message to you, is soil is fun, it's super, and it's everywhere. So everybody has access to it. And so what I'm going to encourage you to do is, with your young people, you're going to go find a spot and shovel out some soil and figure out what it looks like. Okay. So how about we do a little look into my soil. Okay. So this is Okay, I got it. I'm maybe gonna stop sharing for a second so my camera gets bigger. And let's see how well this works, y'all. Okay, I've got my soil cam. We can do that too, but this might work just as easy. So this came out of my garden. My vegetable garden. I'm wondering, do any of y'all in the chat box or want to unmute, make any observations about this soil that you can see? Anybody want to throw something out there? You see?
It looks like little sticks in it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got some, I see, especially back here, we've got some sticks. I think that's probably part of my mulch. So I've got a little bit of maybe hardwood mulch on here, but then a little bit harder to see. I've got some leaf mulch in there too.
Yeah, it looks dark like it's rich dirt.
Yeah, you named a really great soil characteristic. You said color. So dark in color. So our soils are all different colors. I've got this one that's nice and dark. I've got some right here that is, I'm the worst at trying to use a camera on Zoom. This one, if I open it up, is nice and orange. Can't really see that. And I've got some that's a little more gray over here. So soil color, you totally hit on one of the big characteristics. Anybody else see anything?
Is that a rock or is that just a clump of dirt?
Yes, ma'am. That's totally a rock. Good eyes. So we just dug up our backyard for a construction project, and the amount of rocks on in our sort of subsoil is pretty significant. So some rocks actually have some soils have so many rocks in it, they're considered cobbly, depending on the size of the soil. So that's pretty cool. Nice characteristic, good observation.
Maybe leaves.
Yeah, definitely some leaves in there. I'm gonna see if I can find them. Probably, oh, here it is right here. Let me put this. You guys see this? I was surprised to find one. I had to dig deep because the soil in my garden is pretty dry, but I've got some worms in here. And I did find kind of a pill bug in here too. Has anybody ever noticed any maybe want to share some observations of your own soil, of what you have found? Oops, what did I just do? I lost y'all.
We have roly-polies.
Roly-polies, I love them. Okay, cool. So this is what I love. One, we're doing a couple of things. We are destigmatizing getting dirty, right? Kind of exploring, making that something that's okay. You all know the boundaries that you have to set in your center. So maybe this is a day where kids are wearing their dirty clothes, or you've got gardening smocks or t-shirts that they can wear. Maybe you have garden gloves for kids that are a little less certain about digging into the soil. But this is such an easy thing to do, where you go in and you're really starting to make that observation. And when you make observations, you're doing a couple things. You're valuing that thing that you're looking at. So we're beginning to value our soil. Plus, every time you make you're making your observations, you're beginning to notice things that make you wonder, and you're asking questions. So when I think about science starts with a question. So all of this comes from just digging up a little chunk of soil and seeing what we have, or maybe what we don't have, and asking those kind of questions. So let me go back to, that was a great observation, all of y'all. Go back to our slideshow. Oh, I have the slideshow, but I have to actually share it. There we go. There we go. Okay. So y'all said a couple of things. You said the soil was darkly colored. Soil color can tell us a lot. We call that a physical characteristic of soil. It's something we can see, visually see, And in this case, dark colored soil reminds us that it's probably coated with organic matter. So that could be compost you've added to the soil. It could be leaf litter that has decomposed, dead animals in the forest floor. That dark organic matter actually coats the different mineral portions of the soil. Okay, so that tells us a lot. Tells us if we have a darkly colored soil, that the soil probably has something good structure. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Structure is something that lets the soil's pieces clump together so water can go in. We can have roots grow, so you have good drainage, but good moisture in your soil. It can also be an indicator of nutrients, not exclusively, but it can often remind us that there's a lot of nutrients present in decomposed organic matter. And so that's a really good observation to make, and to know that you have an indicator of soil health. Okay. Sometimes our soil looks like this. I am in a 50s neighborhood, and so they left all the topsoil, but you dig just a little bit, and then this is exactly what I run into, a very reddish looking soil. Anybody want to throw out, I totally lost my chat box. Anybody want to throw out why they think the soil is red? You can throw it in the chat box. You can.
Yeah, it's clay.
So probably a good indicator, a correlation to clay, especially if you're here in the Piedmont. If you have a reddish colored soil, it often means clay.
Yeah, I have a lot of that in my yard.
It gets tough. It gets tough to try to garden in this. So that red color actually means that there is a lot of iron in your soil. So if you ever think about, say, you left out a tool or your bike in the rain and it rusts and it gets that red color, that's because of the presence of iron on that compound. And so that's the same for our soil. If we have a reddish colored soil, it doesn't exclusively mean that it's a clay. It just means that it has a high iron content. In the Piedmont, a lot of our clay has iron. So that's a really easy kind of correlation there. But if anyone's from Anson County has a whole pile of sand that is actually red because it is an iron coated sand. It's the coolest thing if you're down in Anson County. We know that this is cool because red iron means that your soil is oxidized, so that there's lots of oxygen in your soil. If it was a gray color, it would mean there's no oxygen, and plants' roots need oxygen in order to function, to grow and develop. And so while sometimes gardening in clay can be a challenge, one really great feature about it is that there's a lot of oxygen. And so when we know a lot of these little pieces about our soil, we can begin to understand what we can do with it. How can we use it? What do we need to do to maybe improve it or think about things differently? Sometimes, and so that's cool. So if you have kids who are rock hounds that love rocks, there's a really strong relationship between the rocks in your area and how it turns into soil. So yeah. Sometimes, let me click on here, your soil maybe has a little bit of a yellowish tint. So that's kind of cool. That refers to the mineral, probably goethite. It's a kin. It's an iron kin, and also just another type of soil. So the more you see, the cooler it is. I've seen green soils. I've seen blue soils, especially out in the coastal areas. I've seen silver soils, all that have sort of tell us a little bit about what's going on. How about, has anyone ever been here before? Or maybe you've been to the Painted Desert out in Arizona, New Mexico, petrified forest. I would love to see this. And so while this isn't totally all soil, some of this is rocks. I mean, this is what we're talking about, is how the earth is formed and how that earth turned into our soil. So I just love that. Okay, so we kind of went through this. This is a picture of my vegetable garden on a good day in the spring when there's been a lot of rain, and it's got a nice dark color because we add compost every year, sometimes in the form of compost, but often more in the form of decomposed leaf mulch, which we'll get to later, that breaks down and turns into compost. Okay. So some other things to think about with kids, right? When you're making an observation, we just made a lot of visual observations, but you can also think about, what does your soil smell like? Okay, I kind of feel like I have an earthy smell. Has anyone ever smelled a soil that is kind of sulfurous? Does anybody ever know what I'm talking about? Sometimes when you have soil where it's really wet, it can give off some unattractive odors. And that's another good indication of like, what's going on here? Why would my soil smell like this? And so maybe somebody's applied manure, maybe there's it's a poor oxygen environment. I'm probably getting too sciencey, but I just want you to know that for most observations, there's some kind of cool reason behind it. And then what does your soil feel like? We're going to actually do this in just a minute, where we are going to feel our soil, because the actual sense of touch will tell us what type of soil we have. And we'll go into a little bit more about what our soil feels like. We've noticed a lot of cool things. So I've talked a lot about our soil physical properties, but soil also has something called biological properties. And these are all of those critters, those microorganisms that are in the soil that help our soil function really well. So things like worms, different insects, different bacteria, different fungi, and all the other kinds of things that I'm neglecting to say, small animals like gophers and moles and that sort of thing. Those are all indicators of things that are going on in your soil. Some positive, like worms. Worms are always a great indicator of soil health, but some things that could be a little bit negative, like maybe you have some nematodes, some plant parasitic nematodes that are eating all of your plants, and they like to live in the soil. So kind of beginning to take a closer look and understand what's going on. If y'all have ever had part of your garden just seemingly die without any reason, that could have been from nematodes. And so, what can we do to minimize those nematodes and help our plants grow? Oh, here we go. That was my cheat slide. Those are all the things I was trying to remember to say on the last one. Okay, so here we are. So we made our little soil observations. We're going to dig deeper in just a minute, but I always like to center on who cares? Why are we caring about soil? Okay, we know we want to grow a garden, but are there some other reasons why soil matters? Why we should be stewards and care about our soil? Now my mouse has soil all over it, so I can feel it scratching. So put something in the chat box if you want to about why you think soil is important.
Because of what we grow in it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an important medium for plant growth. Yes, we can grow plants without soil in hydroponics, but realistically, most of our food, probably 95% of our food, is grown in the soil. Any other reasons? All right, well, I'm going to show you this next slide, which I love. It's an infographic from the Food and Agriculture Organization, part of the UN. And these are all the different ideas of why soil is important. So we had, where's our provision of food, fiber, and fuel, right? So we're growing food plants, we're growing fiber plants, we're growing plants for fuel. Okay, that's a really critical part. And if we don't have soil, we're not going to be able to do these things. And so one of my goals for young people is I want them to know how important and how critical those natural resources are. And so our job is, how can we steward those natural resources that we have? And so this is a part of an ethic of care, of responsibility. How can we, if we're kind to the earth, we're more kind to each other. So that's sort of like one of my little goals is to think about how we can care for these for the things that we use in our everyday lives. Okay, some other kind of cool things that I thought y'all just might like to know. If we're gonna nerd out on soil this afternoon, did you know what you were signing up for? It's a really important part. We talked about habitat for organisms. Okay, so all those soil dwelling organisms, whether they're small mammals, insects, mollusks, other little microorganisms. It's a really important part for if we think, oh, sorry, wrong page, so sensitive. Soil is a filter. So 50% of North Carolinians are on septic systems. I don't know if that is true for any of y'all, but you wouldn't be able to mitigate that waste that you have in your house or in your centers if we didn't have soil as an important filter. So it'll filter different bacteria and other kinds of contaminants. The microorganisms in the soil will break a lot of that down, and so that we can have clean water. It's a big deal in carbon sequestration, not only carbon, but some of those other gases, methane, nitrous oxide. Soil plays a role in keeping those in the ground rather than the atmosphere, so that we have fewer results from some of that climate change. It's important for nutrient cycling, nutrients like nitrogen that are in the air that go into the soil that end up going into plants that we need. So there's a lot of different pieces. Cultural heritage, often thinking about where we are, where we might be gardening, who once has gardened here before or used this soil before, are they still there, why not, and those kinds of conversations. And so soil becomes a really important part, not only for our cultural heritage, but also, for all of these other reasons for us to live, good life. Yep.
Should we see your slides, or you?
Oh yeah, you can't see my slides?
No, just you.
Just me? Oh.
Yeah. But you look great though. Thank you.
I am so sorry. I wish you would have said that sooner. I thought that everyone was seeing this. Hold on.
I was seeing it.
Oh, whoops. There we go. Yeah. How does that look now? Can you guys see? Oh, participants can now see your application. So maybe it wasn't true before. I'm sorry, Sharonda.
Can everybody else see?
Yes.
Okay, maybe it's just me and my computer. Okay.
It's hard to say these days anymore.
Yes, I can see. I'm sorry.
And can you see it now though? Okay. And if I go into presenter mode, how's that, Sharonda?
For me, no. So don't worry about me then. I don't know.
It's just the one big, it's just the one big one. The soil functions, that's the only one I see now.
Okay. And if I change the page, you see this one?
Just that full page, yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, guess what? We're actually going to, I'm going to take it off the slideshow right now in just a second, because we're going to do a little activity. So, but jump in, Sharonda, if you can't see it at all.
I see now. I see.
Oh, okay.
I'm on two screens. I had to find it. Sorry.
Yeah, I got you. So thanks for that. So let's go back for a second. So we've made our observations, we've thought about why soil is important, and now it's important to figure out what kind of soil you have. So a lot of times when we are gardening with young people at your centers or at schools, we're often doing raised bed gardening. And so sometimes the soil that you're using in your raised bed might be a little different than maybe beds that you're doing in the ground, but it matters to I guess know what both of those soils might be. In some of our raised beds, we're often doing like a 50-50 mix. Maybe it's a compost topsoil mix. So figuring out what that topsoil component is. And if we're doing it in the ground, then we really need to figure out what kind of soil we have. So when we think about soil, we think about it has 4 parts. Okay. First part is weathered rock. right? Rock that's broken down over time. And that rate of weathering can happen in a lot of different ways depending on where your landscape is. So the top of the mountain is gonna weather a lot slower than in the river valley. Okay, there's a lot of different what we call climate forming factors. We won't get into that unless you're like really want to nerd out with me. But what that means is we have these weathered rocks that have been broken down into 3 different sizes. We call this the mineral part of our soil. So the biggest soil particle size is sand. Okay, the middle, a little bit smaller, is something called silt. And then that third, the tiniest sized soil particle is clay. And they each have their own different properties. Okay, so we're going to hold on to that for a second. So mineral part of the soil. Then we have organic matter. For a lot of soils, this is pretty small, like maybe only anywhere from 1 to maybe 5%, unless you are out at the coast. Maybe if there, I have any friends from Hyde County out here with all of the big peat bogs, the blackland soils have really high organic matter content. And then we have water and air. So those are the 4 components when we talk about soil, okay? So let's go and focus on that mineral portion. And this is one of my favorite things to do, and I'm totally going to make a mess, okay? So I'm gonna just close that off so that the screen gets bigger here. So when you first are thinking about your soil, I don't know if all of y'all have sandy play areas, but the sand that goes into those play areas, play sand, is sand. It's totally sand, right? It's the largest size soil particles. And so what you guys could do is you could go into your sandbox. I might try to tilt my thing down here, okay? So you can go into your sandbox and get some of your sand, and I want your kids just to feel it. And so what they should feel is grittiness, something that feels like sugar or salt. You could even have some salt or some sugar so that they could try all of those, okay? And once you, and that grittiness will range in size. Sometimes sand can be really coarse and you can see big particles. Other times, if I have any friends that live in the coastal plain like Goldsboro or Kinston, you guys have fine sand over there, and other parts of the state too. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do something called a soil texture by feel. I'm going to make something called a soil ribbon. And what you need for this is just your soil. And you want to grab a handful of it. I'm going to kind of take out the little rock bits, and you just need a bottle of water. Okay. So you're going to spray the water gently. Oh, look how dry it is. That water just rolls right off. Spray it gently, and you want to moisten your soil to try to form a ball. Okay. And the idea here is the greater amount of sand you have, the smaller something that we call a ribbon will be. I'm going to put down some white paper and see if that'll help so that you can see. So when I have this little ball, I can kind of form it into a ball, okay? And then I'm going to toss it and let it fall to the ground, and let's see what happens, okay? And it sort of actually stays in a ball. I'm kind of impressed. Sometimes you'll take a pile of sand like from the beach and it'll just fall apart, right? So the next step is, once we have it into a ball, we're going to try to push over our fingers and see if we can form a little worm or a little ribbon. I don't know how well you're being able to see this. And you see how that kind of just falls apart? That is totally a characteristic of sand. Is it just totally falls apart because the particles are so big, they don't have any way to kind of stick to each other, okay? So that's easy, right? You guys all can probably figure out if you have a pile of sand in your garden. Do I have anybody that is gardening at the beach? I hear little voices. Hi, friends. Okay. So now I'm just gonna wipe off my hands here, and we're gonna move on to my next soil. And then I'm going to kind of walk you through this, but this is an activity that kids love. They all can grab a scoop of that sand. You can come around with the spray bottle, or they can do it themselves depending on the age, and they can mix it up and they can feel for that grittiness and see if it will form a ball, stay in a ball, or fall apart. Okay, that's sand. the next one we're gonna do is my vegetable garden soil, okay? So we've already made the observation, try to avoid my worm here. I'm gonna do the same thing. Oh, you can't see me. I'm gonna put this back down, okay? So I've got another handful of soil. I'm gonna grab my spray bottle and I'm gonna spray this so it's nice and moist. This is the part that I just see soil going all over my keyboard, all over my mouse. And when you first start to wet it, one of the first things you can do is again, kind of try to make like a little touch, okay? So with the sand, if there's any sand in here, if you kind of rub it between your fingers, you can feel for grittiness. And so I can feel a little bit, but I can't feel a lot. It feels pretty smooth. And I don't know if you remember from that slide just a minute ago, silt has kind of a flowery or a silky feel, and I can definitely feel that right now. Okay, so I know that there is a much lower sand content and more of the silt content, okay? But it's actually still kind of dry. So I'm going to take out this little stick in here. I'm going to try to wet this a little more so I can show you, make a ribbon. All right. Let me just clean up my area here so you can see. So now, this is more, maybe you would move on to the garden soil you have for this one. A lot of our garden soils typically have a higher silt content. So now I'm going to try to make a ribbon. All right. And can you guys see how that's staying together? That did not stay together when I was trying to do that with the sand, right? It just sort of fell right over my finger, and I'm just pushing it over my finger like that, and it can stay together. Okay. Next, we're going to move on to some clay. And if you guys have ever used modeling clay, you know how well modeling clay stays together. This won't hold up to that, but it does form a ribbon, and but it falls apart if I tried to do too much more. Okay. So after I'm done getting my hands all dirty, I'm going to show you sort of what all of this means. Like, oh, what is she talking about when I have a lot of sand, a little bit of sand and a lot of silt? Okay, because there's a lot of combinations of sand, silt, and clay. And that's what we're trying to figure out, how much sand, silt, and clay is in my sample. So what this tells me actually is I need to water the garden, that the rain we've gotten has done nothing. So now we're going to move on to this is some soil that the color doesn't come through very well, but is definitely a lot more orangey. This is actually a good example to talk about something called soil structure. So I'm going to try to hold it against that background. You guys can see how it has a clump to it. So soil has different, what we call soil structure, different shapes, and those different shapes can also tell us stuff about soil. So a lot of times our subsoil or clay soil will be something called blocky, and then we have our my garden soil that is what we would call granular, and it kind of looks like a bunch of grape nuts. If you guys have ever eaten grape nuts, that's kind of old school. I date myself when I talk about grape nuts. Do people still eat grape nuts? I don't know. Used to love them. Okay, so now let's do this last soil. It's going to be as hard as a rock, so this could get a little bit messy, but I'm going to try to break this up a little bit so I can grab some of these pieces and take my spray bottle. And our first goal is to wet it, and then we're going to start to, I shouldn't have worn a white shirt today either. I don't know what I was thinking with that. All right. Has anybody ever done this before? Made soil ribbons?
No.
I will through Sharonda and Emma, you guys will have to remind me, but I'll send you all the instructions on how to do this. Especially if any of you are working with school age kids, I'll send you the slides. If you want those, we'll send them anyways. All right, so now that I feel like I just need a clean surface for you to see this. So now I wet this sample, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to feel it. And Can you guys see that? If I put it on my thumb and it's stuck to my thumb. So that stickiness is one of those characteristics about clay. Clay is really tiny. It sticks to everything. If you can wet it and you stick to it and you stick it, then you know there's a high amount of clay. I also am going to take that tiny piece and I'm going to take it between my fingers and I'm going to try to feel for any grittiness. And I don't feel any grittiness, maybe a little bit, but that could be left over too. I didn't wash my hands between this. So now I'm going to try to make that ribbon. And so I'm going to take this and I'm push it over my finger. All right. And can you guys see how long that ribbon is? So I can definitely tell that there is a lot of clay in here. So that sticks together really well. I can move it up and down. It's not really falling apart, that kind of thing. So that tells me that it's clay. So just to further reinforce this notion that I'm 100% a nerd, our soil science folks do what we call our soil geomorphology tour. And we actually start at the beach and we work our way across the state and we are digging holes in all of the places that we stop to check out the soil. And so we're doing this all day long to figure out what kind of soil we have, how's the landscape used depending on that soil. And so the more you do this, the better you actually get to kind of figuring out what sort of soil you have. Okay. So give me like just a 1 minute break and I'm gonna go wash my hands so I don't mess up my computer. And I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna kind of walk you through again what we did, but with some visuals that I think will help you understand this. Okay, so this is something you can totally do with kids, right? You can go out, you can grab a shovel, you just need a water bottle and you can feel for grittiness, smoothness, stickiness, and kind of figure out how much sand, silt, or clay you might have. Okay. So hold on to that thought, little TV break, real quick, commercial break, and I'll be back in just 30 seconds. Okay. Sound good?
Thank you, Liz.
You can play some music. I really will be back in just a second.
If anybody needs to take a little break or if they want to get some soil from your gardens or from your playgrounds, now would be a good time as well. So you can do the experiment as well. Other than that, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. And when Liz gets back, I'll make sure that we ask her those questions.
Did you give them a time frame?
I just said a quick minute or so, but nobody has dropped anything in the chat or said anything. So I'm assuming they may still be, everybody's still here. Is everybody ready to go? Thumbs up, hands up.
Yeah.
Okay,
Ready.
awesome.
Okay.
So logistics are always never my thing, but when you're doing this, I have learned a few things over the years. So if you do this with your kids, having a couple of big buckets of water. So when you are done with doing that, they can just stick their hands in the bucket, wash off all that soil. And then you can go inside and you can like really do a hand washing, but that gets most of the soil off your hands and clean and out of the classroom. So, all right, I'm going to screen share now and go back to our slide. All right, Sharonda, you're my pulse. Can you see this one? Thank you. Okay, so this is just what we did, right? We tried to figure out if we have sand, silt, or clay. And there's actually a dichotomous key that you can use to do the same thing. And this is just a reiteration of what we did. So we started with some soil, we moistened it with water, and then we ask ourselves these questions. Does the soil stay in a ball when squeezed? Well, it did for most of them, right? Did it fall apart? Was it too dry? And so if you squeeze it and it totally falls apart, then we know it's a pile of sand, okay? But otherwise, this is what we did, is it stayed in a ball. And so now we're going to try to form a ribbon. Well, how long was that ribbon? Was the ribbon shorter or longer than 2.5 centimeters. If it was pretty short, 2.5 centimeters, less than that, then what we have is something called loamy sand. And I'm going to show you something that will tell you what this means. So this loamy sand means that we have a lot of sand, but it's also qualified by a little bit of silt and a little bit of clay. Okay. So we can go through, and it does this for all of the different soil types. Okay, sandy clay loam, silty clay loam. Do you ever know there were so many ways to name a soil? So another way to kind of think through this is to do something what I love to call the soil shimmy. So I bet we have a lot of dancers out there. If you're not a dancer, I bet your kids are a dancer. And this is kind of another cool way to figure out what type of soil you have. So I'm going to take my mixture of garden soil, okay? And I'm going to put it in a jar with some water. You might want to use a soda bottle or a peanut butter jar, plastic, depending on the age of your kids. And you're actually just going to take some of your soil and you're going to put it in this jar. So I always can never, it's always backwards to do the camera. And so I'm always like, what direction do I go? Okay. It doesn't matter how much soil you put in, and it doesn't matter how much water that you have in here. One thing you can do, I don't know if it really makes a difference. You can actually add a little bit of powdered dish detergent. Sometimes that helps separate out the different soil particles. So once you have this, put a lid on, and then you're going to shake it. Okay. And this is where the dancing comes in. So you can turn on Dirt Made My Lunch. You can turn on your other Soul Train, right? Because when I first moved to North Carolina and they interviewed my position I was interviewing for my position, they asked me what I knew about soul. And I was like, I've got soul. I've got so much passion for this job. But really, they wanted to know what I knew about soil. So anyways, you can play whatever you want and pass this around, or each of your students can have a jar. And then what you're going to do is you're going to let it just sit in a spot and let it settle. And you can already sort of start to see, not very well because, you know, we're on a computer, but you can see those, maybe if I put this behind it, I don't know if that will help. Maybe not really. You can see the heavier particles are going to settle out faster. So you actually, I can see that a lot settled out quickly, which tells me that there's more sand in here in my garden sample than I actually thought. And then you'll have sand, coarse sand, less coarse sand, your silt, and then your clay. So then you can just leave this in a spot by the window, on a table, let it settle for over 24 hours and kind of see what you have. And so this is, you can eyeball it. You can be like, oh, look, there's a whole mess of sand in there. And you're looking for the different layers, if I didn't make that clear. And so you can just use it to sort of be like, wow, there's a lot of sand in there. That confirms what I thought. Or especially if you have any school age kids, you can do a little bit of math. And sometimes this is easier depending on your soil than others. But what you do is you measure the total amount of your soil particles. So in this case, take a ruler and you measure that you've got 2.5 inches, which is, you know, quite a bit of soil that you're putting in there. Then you're going to measure the different layers, right? 2 inches, quarter inch. And from there, you can make percentages. So especially for, this is getting a little bit into 6th grade math, but a little bit of maybe 5th grade too. So once you convert those into percentages, you can say, oh, look, 80% sand. Well, that also is like a whole mess of sand. So you don't need to say 80%. You can just know that there was a lot. There was a really thick layer of sand. And then you've got these smaller percentages of silt and clay. So why that matters is this is the slide I've been working towards, is taking you back to Soils 101. Soil, if you look on the different arrows, we've got, let me get my cursor here. We've got clay, silt, and we've got sand. Okay. So if we take that example where we had 80% sand, 10% clay, 10% silt, what we end up with is right on that border of loamy sand or sandy loam. Okay. And so that's what we're doing, is when we're feeling that soil sample, when we're making that little ribbon, we're trying to figure out what is the percentage of sand, silt, and clay? And why that's important is because if you have, say example, your soil has a lot of sand, you're going to have a lot of big spaces between your soil particles. So you might have really droughty soil. So the beach is a perfect example. There's not a lot of stuff that grows at the beach because it's so dry. And also, there's like some other characteristics about it too. But for something like clay, we don't have a lot of productive farmland in clay because clay is so tiny. There's little tiny spaces between those soil particles. So it's a lot harder for water to get into the soil, to get through the soil, and to be available for plants. So knowing what kind of soil you have helps you understand what you might need to do it and how you can do with it and what you can use it. So we're going to try this. I don't know if it will work out. Let me put this link in the chat box. We're going to try to do something called the soil particle play. Okay. This is something that I normally do with a bunch of little bodies in the classroom where kids are acting out the different soil particles and they can see that physical relationship between the soil particle and how water moves through the soil and then how plants move through the soil. But we're going to try it on Google Jamboard. And so I don't know if this will work out or not, but I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And in the chat box, oh, I just closed my chat box. Find my cursor. There we go. So let's see what happens when we go here. I might have to change the setting. I don't know if I remembered to do that. Let's see. Share. Can anybody do this? Anyone with the link can add it. Okay, perfect. Look at me. I actually knew what I was doing. So if you guys click on that link, I'm gonna just delete this for a second. All right, I see Sharonda joined. Anybody else making it there? And I can screen share too. And hopefully we can, this is a good point, right? So some of this, right, if it's skewing too old, we need to make sure it's skewing to meet what your littles can do. So if you are here, I'm going to screen share. So if you guys, sometimes Jamboard can be slow to load. So let me, while you guys do exactly what you're doing, you're moving those big circles into the big circle. I'm going to screen share so folks can see. All right. And if you're on, try to put those circles all over and the little circles in the big circle. Do exactly what you're doing. I'm glad you can read instructions because I can't verbalize them. All right, nice work. You guys are amazing. So what if this was us? What if this was in a classroom and these were all little bodies, okay? Those little bodies would be putting their arms all the way out, fingertip to fingertip. They would be spreading themselves out. And then when they drop their hands, this is what we get. We get all of the space in between. Let me grab my marker here, okay? So can you guys visualize that with me? So kids spread themselves out fingertip to fingertip, and this is what they ended up with. This is what sandy soil looks like. There is, and then, okay, let me go back. So then we have a big thunderstorm. We're slapping our legs. Maybe you have music in the background of a thunderstorm. And I usually nominate one child to be my thunderstorm. And their job, if you guys see my little blue water here, so their job is to rain and make their way through the soil, okay? So this is them physically moving through the soil. Does that kind of make sense to you? So let me ask you this question. Was that pretty easy? Was that hard for me? Did I move through fast, slow? What did that look like when I drew that blue line? Could you see me draw the blue line?
You moved through kind of fast.
Yeah, pretty quickly. Thank you. I did, and that's exactly, again, what sandy soil does. It has a lot of room between its soil particles. There's a lot of room for air, a lot of room for water. So that can be a benefit for plants that can handle really dry soil. It's good because there's a lot of aeration. But what happens is if you're a plant that needs water, that water usually goes through too fast before you can grab it. And so that's what sandy soil does. So now if you guys all switch with me to the second slide, we're going to use, this is our silt slide. So now if you would do this again, grab some circles, little circles, and toss them into the big circle. So while you're doing that, if we were in a classroom, we would have kids, we would have them be in a circle elbow to elbow. So now the space between us becomes a lot smaller, right? They're going elbow to elbow, they drop their elbows, and then we're going to have another thunderstorm. So here's me, thunderstorm, flapping our legs, making that noise. And now we're trying to go through. Let's see. Oh, somebody's trying to block me. I love it. Wait till we get to clay, then you'll really be a linebacker. This is what kind of a silty, or often silt can be somewhat synonymous with loamy soils. Loam is kind of a mixture of sand, silt, and clay, a pretty equal proportion mixture. And this is some of the best soil for gardening because water can move through, because we don't want water to sit in our soil and rot away our roots, our plants, but we don't want it to go through so fast that we can't grab onto it. So our loamy soil, which has a good amount of silt to it, is great for growing plants, okay? And remember, that was my middle soil. I had a loamy soil for my garden soil, and plants really like this, okay? So now, the last one you can imagine is our clay. Clay is the smallest soil particle. So now we've got kids in the classroom lining up, and I tell them to whisper their shoulders together. And the first time I did this, I was naive to the ways of young children. I was like, who wants to try to be the soil particle? Well, they really are all lined up like little linebackers, and they're like, just try to get me, little water particle. You can't get past me. So typically I just ask them at this point to make an observation, because the spaces, as you can see, are all really tight, and it's really hard for that water to try to begin to make its way through. So water actually can go through all of these different spaces, okay? But it takes a lot longer. It's harder for it to go into that soil profile, and it takes longer for it to move through. So clay soil can be a challenge in that way. It can be pretty erodible, because if water is piling up here, then it's also going to take some of the soil with it and go downstream, okay? Clay is one of our #1 pollutant in our waterways. If you look at all of our rivers, the Neuse, the Yadkin, French Broad, all of them, a lot of them have sediment in the water, and that's because of erosion. And so clay soil isn't impossible, okay? We can do something with it. If I come through, and this is what we're gonna kind of wrapping up here. If I add compost does this. Compost works like glue. It glues all of these little soil particles together. So we still have our clay soil, but now instead of being like a linebacker ready to block the kick, now we've got these clumps that our water can move through, okay? So now that's sort of my next transition is, let's talk about what's next. How can we build our soil health? Does that kind of make sense for you guys? The kids love it. I'm such a physical kinesthetic learner that I love like pretending I'm that soil. I can visually see what's happening, and it makes, for me in my brain, it makes a connection to what I just was feeling and touching and doing, okay? So now here's this next part, right? How do we build soil health? I like to think of it as a recipe. So these are just a few ideas that I thought would be simple that we could do in our gardens, okay? #1, add compost. So maybe y'all have a compost bin. Maybe you're getting municipal compost or bags of compost, but compost, remember, is organic matter. It's dead leaves, decomposed. Well, the commercial stuff's not like dead animals, that kind of stuff. But all of that organic matter acts like the glue, just like I showed you for those clay particles. Okay, so it improves soil structure. So now we can have better movement of water through the soil. It makes more room for little critters to grow and live in. A lot of critters will eat that carbon. You're sequestering your carbon. And then you can add nutrients, okay, especially depending on the type of compost that you're putting in there, okay? So adding compost is a great way to improve your garden. And if you guys are doing raised beds, this is something that you should definitely do maybe like every 3 years. You'll find that the soil in raised beds sometimes likes to try to fall apart. It doesn't hold its soil moisture. I used to work in a public garden where we had this one bed that it was like fine dust after a couple of years. And we'd always get a bunch of actually composted dairy manure from our dairy barn on campus, and it totally reinvigorated that soil. Okay, so add compost. That's my number one recommendation for building your soil health. 2, add some mulch, okay? Who wants to work in the garden in 97, 100-degree heat? Not me. So let's let the mulch do it for us. So this will, again, not only break down into organic matter over time, but it also does a lot of things like keeps the weeds down, but it keeps your soil moisture locked in. So you're watering less. So we're stewarding our water resources, you're building soil structure, and you're adding nutrients to the soil. So mulch is another really good amendment to your soil. And then what about some other things? So think about rotating your crops. This can be hard depending on how big your garden is, but say you have 4 raised beds, you maybe do, let's talk about summer crops. Maybe you do tomatoes in this bed in year 1, and then year 2, you move tomatoes to the next bed. Sometimes we have classrooms that each are assigned a bed, so it might be a little bit harder to rotate, but you could do tomatoes on this end and then do them in the middle and then do them on the other end. So anyway, so think about that, because that will do a lot of things. Some crops, like corn is a great example. I know corn can be hard to grow in our small raised bed gardens, but corn takes up so much nitrogen. It's a nitrogen user. So then the next year, what if we put in some green beans? Green beans are nitrogen fixers. So they put nitrogen back in the soil. And so that's, again, kind of going back and building that soil health. Cover crops do the same exact thing, is where they, hold on, I have little people in here that I need to tell. So then the last part is thinking about maybe cover crops. Do you ever just get tired of your garden and you need a respite? Well, sometimes so does our soil. So cover crops can do that. They are great babysitters of the soil. So in the summer, stuff like cowpeas and buckwheat, those are great, and sunflowers are great to add to your soil, because you want to keep it covered. You're adding nutrients, you're adding organic matter. And so all of this stuff is really easy to do. It just becomes a part of your practice, where you're just, instead of solely focusing just on your plants and how your plants are doing, we're focusing on building up our soil. So then we have fewer problems with our plants later on. So all of this work will end up with like more critters in your garden, better soil moisture, more nutrients, healthier plants. But in the next one, we can talk a little bit more on the plant side of things. But those are my recommendations for you, is knowing what kind of soil you have and knowing that these things will just keep building and improving your soil. All right. And there's I'm just gonna like do a little throwback Wednesday, but 2015 was the year of the soil as proclaimed by the UN. And so all of us soil scientists love to just like reminisce on, remember that year that was dedicated solely to soil. But there's some great infographics. So I don't know how much of sort of like digital content you might be using with your young people, but these are some great posters that you could print out, or you could show and it talks about all of the important things about soil. The one last thing I'll leave you that a lot of times kids are not making that connection is the nutrients that are in our soil are the nutrients that are taken up by the plant that we then eat and use in our body. And so I love this infographic just as a resource to think about, if we're taking care of our soil, then the plants can use it and we're taking care of our body and making that connection to all the healthy stuff that we're growing. Soil, we have fewer and fewer soil resources just for so many different things, development, climate change, different industries. And so our role through our little gardens, I think, is to help begin to take care of our soil and know that it gives back to us. It is a hard to renew resource. It takes 500 years to build 1 inch of soil. And so if we don't take care of it, then it's pretty much gone. So and this is what we want, right? This is the time of year we want those red, juicy tomatoes coming in. And if we take care of our soil, we get them. Okay. Woo. Did you, I hope you now just think about soil a little bit differently and put a little more effort into building that soil health. And I think you'll have a lot of fun doing it. So questions, what else can we talk about? What do you want to know? What I miss? I will send all these resources to Sharonda. I'm going to send the activities and I'll send you a little background information too if you want to nerd out on some soil. I did check off a bucket list. I was able to go to Petrified Forest last summer and see the Painted Desert, and it was amazing. It wasn't like that Rainbow Mountain in Peru, but it was pretty awesome. So never know what you might find in the ground.
Thank you so much, Liz. And that was very informational about the soil. So does anyone have any questions or comments in regards to, what you're doing at your centers right now, and maybe a question in regards to your soil that she may be able to help you with?
I just had a question about one of those last posters that she showed about us getting the nutrients out of the soil to our bodies. Is that something that we'll be able to print off?
Absolutely. I can send you, maybe what I'll do is I'll embed the link, make sure the link's embedded in the slideshow. And so if Sharonda and Emma share that, you can get it. It's basically through the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and they're all downloadable files that you can print out that are high resolution, but they're really interesting, really informative, kind of break it down into those key points.
Yes, because I think that's something we really don't think about, and it would be fun to share that with our kids as we are gardening.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Barbara.
Welcome. I enjoyed it.
R. Jackson said it was very informational, and she also knew a lot of these things about the soil. And thank you for reminding us that soil is important so we can help our children learn how to help keep our soil healthy. That's a very good point too.
It's definitely a lot harder to care on a day like today, but I really invigorate my soil efforts in the fall and the spring for sure. So tuck those away.
Anyone else? Please feel free, unmute yourselves. Emma, do you have the survey to drop in? So Emma will drop in the survey that we do need. So if you guys don't mind filling that out for us today. And next week, we will have a watch party. So we will look at one of our past learning bursts that were recorded. And then the following week, we will have Liz back. Yay! Because you are so energetic. We love you. So she, go ahead.
Tiny PSA. I thought we would focus maybe a little bit on garden management. So what do you have growing? What are some of the problems? What are things to think about? Maybe there's some bugs, some disease, that sort of thing.
So please, you guys, bring all of that information. Like if you have questions about it, if you literally just have the bug or worm, because we had that one year, and you say, Liz, this is in my garden. What is this? How do I get rid of this? What is this? What it's doing? Trust me, she will love it. She will answer it because, like she said, she's a hands-on and person and likes to get in there with you. So please, please, bring that information, bring everything to us, bring your bugs, bring your worms. I don't do snakes, so just let me know and I can turn my camera off, you know.
I do
Other
snakes.
than that,
I love them.
see, she's a good one. She'll do that for you, so you know. Anything else, Liz or Emma?
No, thanks, y'all. Yeah, do if you have questions, you feel free to send me anything and glad to walk through it. So appreciate your time.
We appreciate you as always. Thank you so much. And as always, Emma will send out everything by the end of the week. And if you have any other questions or want any information, more information, you can reach out to me or Emma or Liz directly yourselves as well. Okay, she's always accessible. So thank you again.